Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to welcome author Tracy Viola. Tracy was born in Philadelphia's Main Line, where she currently resides with her husband, two daughters, and calico cat Olivia. She graduated from Villanova University and has a master's degree in counseling psychology from Temple. She has been continuously sober since 1996 and has recently published her first book, Pretty Wrecked: Confessions of a Teenage Addict and Her Road to Recovery. Tonight, she is going to share with us how the fundamentals she learned in early recovery are still applicable and valuable in her life today, 28 years later, and how these lessons, tips, and tricks are endlessly beneficial for everyone, regardless of alcohol and addiction issues. So, welcome, Tracy. It's all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mallory. Thank you, Karen. I just loved hearing all of the different seminars and educational meetings. You guys are just doing great work. It's really amazing. It just warms my heart to know that there's so much out there being done for people and being done for families. So I always like to let people know I shoot straight from the hip. I do curse sometimes. I'm not like a sailor, but just so if you have little ears near you, just FYI, I always just like to let people have that warning because I often just kind of share openly and honestly, and sometimes don't filter myself all the time. So I just wanted to give that warning. So here's my topic for tonight. So as Mallory said, there are so many beautiful lessons that I have learned in recovery that I almost feel like are these like secrets where I'm like, why are we not teaching this to everybody? Why doesn't everybody know these amazing life tips? And so we're going to go over some of those tonight. So again, whether you have 1 day or 10,000 days, the basics still apply. That's what I've learned. So I'm going to start off by telling you a little story. A few months ago, I was actually speaking for a high school. And this health teacher had read some of the vignettes from my book, Pretty Wrecked, to her high school class. And they were able to write down anonymous questions for me when I came in to speak to them. And, after I was done my talk, I was kind of going through the questions and answering them. And I came across one question. Obviously, this kid was just trying to be a little bit snarky with me. But the question read, I'll hold it up to the camera. Did sobriety teach you the secrets of the universe? Obviously, they were being, again, a little bit of a goof. But I remember reading this question and I kind of smiled and I looked out at the class and I said, yeah. Yes, sobriety did actually teach me the secrets of the universe. So we're going to go over some of those secrets tonight. As we dig into this, again, this is based on my experience. This is an N of one, but this is over the course of many, many years. And just to kind of classically introduce myself, my name is Tracy. I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict. I've been sober for 28 years, which obviously means I got sober at 4 years old. I'm just kidding, obviously, but I did get sober at 19 years old. I was very, very lucky to get sober so young. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time tonight talking about what it was like, because I feel like if we're sitting here in this meeting, then we probably know. We probably have had some experience in understanding what it was like. What I do want to spend some time on is what happened and what it's like now, because the what it's like now is the best part. What it was like is a mess. And I'm going to share with you a story that got me to where I am today. I'm going to share with you a story that's kind of a bit of in my book, and it kind of fast forwards to kind of what happened moment. And then we're going to get into what it's like today. So this is a chapter from my book called The Cold and the Heat. I'm going to put my glasses on for it. I do need readers now. My mother calls me downstairs. There is a fear and urgency in her voice. I see her hovering over our dog Ruffles, crying and asking me, "What do we do? What do we do?" over and over. All I can do is kiss my childhood dog and pet her fluffy white hair and thank her for 15 years of her perfect love. And it is on that cold February night on our kitchen floor that Ruffles dies. The only reason I'm in the house for that moment is because my mother allowed me to come home for my grandfather's funeral. My pop-up had died about 4 days prior than the night we lost Ruffles. We had actually buried him that very morning. The next day, with swollen eyes and a depth of sorrow I had not yet experienced in my 19 years, my mom opened up the front door to kick me out again. See, I had signed myself out of rehab about a month prior in early January. And after I left rehab against doctor's orders, my mother had refused to let me come home. The only reason I was allowed to stay in the house for those couple of days was to bury my grandfather. But the funeral was over, and it was time for me to leave again. After having spent the previous month bouncing from basement to basement, sleeping in the back of unlocked vehicles, or staying in backyard sheds I knew were safer on certain streets, you can imagine that being homeless again was not something I was looking forward to say the least. Still, I mustered up the courage to grab my bag and walk towards that front door, trying to prove to myself and my mom that I could hack it, that I had it together. "I've got this," is a phrase I had repeatedly told myself throughout my addiction, and today would be no different. But I made a mistake. As I walked towards the front door, being held open by my mom, I looked back to the bottom of the staircase where Ruffles should be sitting, where she was always sitting, but she wasn't there. And as I looked back and forth between the open door and my missing dog, I was leveled with the undeniable truth that I didn't know. I didn't have this. I was broken and frozen. I didn't know what I wanted or where to begin. I knew in that moment, after 4 years of alcoholism and addiction, that my way wasn't working. So that's what happened. Let's talk a little bit about what it's like now. I would say in that moment, in that those first couple of weeks, the key word for me was responsibility. As I embraced recovery in my second rehab, I took responsibility for my next steps. As they say in How It Works, I mean, it's a classic, right? Half measures availed us nothing. I had to essentially start my life over at 19 years old. And the gift that I didn't realize I was being handed at the time was the fact that somebody gave me a book and it had tools and a structure for how to live a successful life, whatever successful, might mean to you. It's a variety of things, I think, in life is really success. But this book included steps, guidelines, quotes, stories, and the book even came with a whole community of people that were willing to share their experience on things. They had probably been through most of the stuff that I had questions about, and they shared their information openly, willingly, honestly, and most of the time pretty funny, actually. If you've ever been to an AA meeting, it's actually shocking how much laughter occurs during a meeting. So what I did was I wanted to think about all of these tips and lessons and quotes and important things that I learned in early sobriety, and all of these things that I still come back to this day, 28 years later. I've really tried to boil it down to those key pieces, which are probably going to be familiar for a lot of you. And the thing that I love about the pieces that I'm going to share with you they are truly applicable to anybody. Whether you're in recovery, whether you've been touched by substance use disorder, or whether you're just like a human living this ever-changing life. These are secrets of success that I teach my children. The irony of the gift of recovery, though, is that I had to destroy my life in order to be given the handbook of how to live it. So I felt like for tonight's purposes, we could skip the destruction and the pain, because frankly, I think that was a pretty steep price that I had to pay. And let's skip all of that and get right to the good stuff. I will say, though, before it's good stuff, in the beginning, it kind of feels like this. This mess, overwhelming mess, is kind of the way early sobriety certainly felt like to me. Daunting, overwhelming, messy. But despite all those, those exciting feelings of sobriety, I also had this other side of me that was like, wow, I have a lot to clean up. And it's overwhelming, and you have to start somewhere. And I would say that this mess of Legos really goes for anything new. I think about um, my book. So I recently wrote, published, and have learned how to distribute a book, and that's kind of going through different Lego pieces. It's something new, and it's scary, and it's overwhelming. And I've learned those muscles of how to accept the pile of messy Legos because I've had to sort through them before in early sobriety, and again at multiple times in my life. So this successful sorting of the Lego piles is definitely one of the key secrets of my universe. And it's how I built the foundation of my recovery, was building it one Lego at a time. So let's break that down. Common phrase, right? Meeting makers make it. One of the first things I was told in early recovery in my second rehab was, you're going to show up and you're going to shut up. And as you can imagine, as a know-it-all 19-year-old teenager, that was very hard for me, especially the shut up part. Frankly, the shut up part's still kind of hard for me. But what I want to talk about this is my exposure to meetings. I went to all different types of meetings. I went to AA, I went to NA, and I personally found my home in AA because I really liked the long-term sobriety. When somebody's new in recovery, I tell them it's kind of like finding a workout class. It's kind of like finding the right yoga teacher. For me to find my favorite yoga teacher, I had to go to 3 different studios, try multiple teachers, and finally I found Caitlin. And I love Caitlin. She's my favorite yoga teacher. Finding meetings is kind of like that. That's the beauty of today. And by the way, also everything's like online. I used to have a pamphlet. I used to have a pamphlet where all the meetings were, and you just kind of hoped it was up to date. Now you can look online, you can find all different types of meeting, different times of meeting, different topics of meeting, open, closed, and you can go and try them on. There's going to be people at certain meetings that you connect to. There's going to be people at certain meetings that drive you crazy. And that's the nice thing, is about finding your place in those meetings and feeling like you can really open up in the right place. The shut up part, one of the quotes I remember so well from my counselor, Jim, and Jim and I are still very close. I remember him saying to me, take the cotton out of your ears and stuff it in your mouth, because you don't know anything. So I remember it like literally him saying that to me and being so shocked. But these slogans, I remember them also being so annoying, and sitting in those meetings and seeing them in that old time writing, and like framed in those, like, I think it was like, like whatever, like 8x12 frames all around the meeting rooms. And they were so annoying. And gosh darn it, if they don't work, right? If they don't work. This is another quote that I love by Nate Walker. Things break during transformation because they resist. So I had to show up, shut up, and be willing to bend. And those are really hard things to do in early sobriety. I think at any age. Certainly, I can speak on my experience at 19 years old, but those are very hard things to do in early sobriety. And I really think it's that idea of being flexible, which is something that I still have to work on in life. There's still certain aspects of life where I can be like a little bit more rigid, and I'm kind of type A and stuck in certain ways. And so I love this quote. I have quotes all around my office and all around my house. And this reminds me that I need to be willing to change, and willing to be flexible, and willing to listen to others and mold myself still, 28 years later still. So listen to the slogans. They really work. We're going to dig into a couple of these slogans in a little bit more detail. The other thing I had to learn to stop doing was making justifications and rationalizations and excuses. I mean, I was an addict. I was really, really good at those things. That was like kind of my jam. And now coming into AA, I had to stop doing that. One of the first, I guess I'll say, justifications or excuses that I remember making was, I'm too young, right? I mean, now I see kids that are like 14, 15, 16. It's amazing. But at the time, 19, I was one of the youngest in the room, and there was not many of us young people. And I remember saying, I'm too young. And I remember somebody came over to me after the meeting, didn't say a word, and they just handed me a pamphlet. And the pamphlet reads, do you think you're different? And I remember like, touche. So they still have that pamphlet. By the way, I looked up, I was at a meeting recently. I was like, where's the "Do you think you're different" pamphlet? And they still do have that. So show up, shut up. Oh, and by the way, do this every day for like lots of days. So I know what that feels like to hear that. Like I remember hearing that. I know what it felt like to live that. And what I actually want to read is a great story. It's called Behind the Curtain. It's in my book, by the way. This is my book, Pretty Wrecked. We'll talk about this a little bit more at the end if you'd like, but I'm going to read you this excerpt. It's in a vignette called Behind the Curtain. And my friend Dave did a great job of capturing that. So you want me to show up and shut up day after day and just kind of do that. And he called it out at a meeting, and I remember it really impacted me. So, behind the curtain. In a large meeting one evening, Dave raised his hand to share. He stood up, but hesitated before speaking, rubbing his eyes and forehead like he was frustrated. He and I had both been sober for around 10 months at this point, and I felt like we were in a good groove, working, starting to attend classes, going to meetings, etc. And then he made a comment that I still remember 28 years later. Hi, my name is Dave, and I'm an alcoholic and addict. Proud response. Hi, Dave. You know, I've been coming to these meetings for a decent number of months, and I hear what you're saying. One day at a time, one day at a time, one day at a time. Again, he hesitated. And that's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing. But even though you're saying one day at a time, you assholes really mean forever. His blunt honesty and bold statement had most of the group laughing or nodding their heads in agreement. But hearing this raw truth spoken aloud shook me. It was as if somebody had exposed the man behind the curtain, like I was suddenly squinting hard enough to be able to see the puppet strings. It was one day at a time, but for the rest of my time. In my early recovery and months, I did experience fears regarding how I would celebrate certain milestones in my life. Would I drink along with everybody else to celebrate graduating from college? Or at my wedding, would I be able to cheers my new husband without a glass of champagne? What would those experiences be like without alcohol or drugs? What about when I gave birth to my children? Would I risk taking painkillers or an epidural? And in general, what about hanging out with friends, going out to dinner, vacations? Would I always just order water? I go on a little bit more in the story, but the point is that I remember feeling that way. I remember hearing, take it one day at a time, but like forever. And it can be very overwhelming. So there's a way that I learned early on to make this easier. So let's talk about that. Baby steps. I love the 1980s and 90s. And one of the best movies, by the way, still really, really holds up. Highly recommend you go watch it if you haven't seen it in a while, is What About Bob? So let me switch to this. We're going to watch a video in just a moment. But here's another quote that I love. Real change, enduring change happens one step at a time. Let me pull this up.
Baby steps?
It means setting small, reasonable goals for yourself, one day at a time. One tiny step at a time.
Baby steps.
For instance, when you leave this office, don't think about everything you have to do in order to get out of the building. Just think of what you must do to get out of this room. And when you get to the hall, deal with that hall, and so forth. You see?
Baby steps.
Right. I love this part, this picture here of Bob sailing when they had to tie him to the boat. Anyway, it's a great movie. It still really, really holds up. And I think it's such a great movie for psychology. I think they actually did with my background in psychology, I have a master's in counseling psychology. I actually think this movie did a really good job. Side note, another movie that just did a really, really good job was Inside Out 2. It's like a animated movie. The way that they capture anxiety was fabulous. So if you, I know maybe you don't have younger children or whatnot, go watch Inside Out 2. It's hilarious, and it's a really, really good movie. They did a great job. So what that clip is telling us in What About Bob is baby steps, right? You've got to crawl before you can walk. And then when you're walking, you got to kind of try to balance yourself and take it one little step at a time. I think I mentioned this earlier, but life is not stagnant, right? It's not meant to be. And that's kind of, in my honest opinion, that's kind of like the beauty and the bitch of it, is that it's not stagnant. It's not the same all the time. I'm a type A Taurus personality. I actually really don't love change. Oddly enough, I'm really good at it, but I don't love it. And it's so funny, Mallory and I were talking about this before everybody joined, this idea of you don't need to like it all the time. You just need to do it. And that's really what I learned in early sobriety. Baby steps is how I got to 5 days, how I got to 50 days, 9 months, 9 years. And throughout all of these baby steps, it helps to build those Legos, right? Use those Legos to keep building that castle of sobriety and of my life, right? Getting the college degree, going on for more education, advancing in the job, healing from the trauma of my alcoholic and neglectful father, healing from the trauma of my abusive stepfather, so I could actually marry a wonderful partner. And all of those gifts that have come from baby stepping, and taking it and taking it in bite-sized pieces. Another one that I love, let me go ahead here, is think, think, think. Now, there's a funny story about this one. I have it on the sign here. There's a guy named Bo, real raspy voice, real kind of rough guy, in one of my home group meetings very early on in sobriety. And he came over to me at the end of a meeting. He said, hey, see that sign? Bo said, and he pointed to the wall. Yeah, that's not for you. Not yet. Do not think, think, think. Because the other phrase that you probably heard before as well is stinking thinking, right? So that got me into a lot of trouble. And so think, think, think was not for me, not yet. My job was to do. So I'm going to read another note. This is in regards to baby steps. I've got to put my glasses back on. I can read that. That's big. I can't read this. So this is in a chapter called Baby Steps in my book. So instead of think, 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 this is what I did. To stay focused and busy, I quickly got a job. 2, actually. I opened a fitness center first thing in the morning and worked as a waitress primarily in the afternoons, leaving evenings open for going to AA meetings. This is what I did day after day, week after week, for months. In the 1991 movie, What About Bob? There's a fantastic scene where Bob is trying to patiently, uncomfortably wait to receive a phone call. He keeps staring at the clock and repeating to himself, baby steps to 4 o'clock, baby steps to 4 o'clock. And that's pretty much how I spent my early sobriety, baby steps. Since I didn't know how to function without drugs or alcohol, I became like a horse with blinders on. Don't look left, don't look right, look straight ahead, taking one step at a time. I was baby stepping. And the crazy thing is, it was working. I still baby step throughout my days. So thinking about, how this is relevant today, 28 years later, I still love to plan my days in the morning, or at the night before, ideally, or first thing in the morning. I get up at 6:15 a.m. Monday through Friday to work out, because I know that if I don't work out first thing in the morning before my workday starts, it's not going to happen. So I have to baby step my way to actually get up to that alarm clock. Don't need to like it. I do need to do it. The other thing that AA's taught me, recovery's taught me, is you need to do it, especially when you don't feel like it, which sounds really counterintuitive. And again, that's something my kids just love hearing from me. I'm sure you can imagine. But I've learned that I've learned this grit, and sometimes it's a grind, from showing up to meetings, from being told to get involved, from being told to put the chairs away or make the coffee or go talk to that new person, rip the Band-Aid off, do today, Don't put off tomorrow what you can do today. All these things were just kind of, I don't want to say pounded into my head, that sounds bad, but all these things were really, really taught to me at such a young age. And I'm so grateful that at 19 and 20, those were the teachings that I was getting. There's another one that's really nice, because when you're baby stepping, the nice piece is you don't have to think very far ahead. Pretty sure you guys have heard this one before, one day at a time. Hoping that sounds familiar to everybody. And regardless of sobriety or anybody here, I'm sure that the saying is familiar for lots of people. For me, one day at a time became less of a saying and more literally of a way of life. It just became, it kind of, along with baby stepping, baby stepping leads you to one day at a time, and this became a way of life. I would say, above all of the tips and tricks and quotes and lessons, this really is key. And that's why they say it all the time. And that's why it's really, really annoying, because it works. Let me read one other short piece. So this is from a vignette in the back of my book. So I have these things called vignettes in certain chapters, which are me now, older, wiser-ish, with much more sober eyes, looking back on different experiences, obviously with a very different lens. And this is one in retrospect that I'll just share. It's very brief. So it was good. This guy tried to trick me and I almost fell for it. So he said, so the story goes, for my 18-year sobriety anniversary, I was asked to speak at an AA meeting. After the meeting, a bunch of us were outside talking, and a guy, maybe 10 years older than me, said, wow, 18 years. That's pretty amazing. May I ask, how did you do it? In my head, I started going through all of the lessons and quotes and tips and tricks and all of the other things that I've applied in order to get and stay sober for those 18 years. And I was about to rattle all of them off like a list of sober to-dos. But then I paused. This was a trick question. I looked him in the eye and I smiled. One day at a time, I answered simply. He smiled back at me, nodded, and said, good job. So I know we say it a lot. I know we hear it a lot. I think there's a reason for that. I think it's because it works. To the other side of this is a very cool military strategy that I heard a few years back. And I kind of look at these kind of hand in hand. Sometimes when people want to maybe roll their eyes at one day at a time, I go with ODA, observe, orient, decide, act. I actually think it makes a lot of sense. And I do think that ODA does a good job of explaining how I kind of got through one day at a time. I would actually also argue, I was thinking about this earlier, I don't have this in my notes and I don't have this in my speech, but I was also thinking about that ODA is kind of the way that my husband and I argue. And I will actually say that the gifts of recovery have helped me in my marriage so much, because I don't keep a record of wrongs. If I am annoyed, I say it right away. I don't care where we are. I don't care who's there. I'm like, nope, that did not work for me. And I speak up, which is such a beauty to be able to do in front of my children, to teach them to advocate for themselves and to express their feelings. But anyway, I would say that when I think of ODA, observe, orient, decide, act, I would say that my husband and I, what was the word I thought of earlier? It's kind of like observe, discuss. That was it. So it's almost like ODDA. Observe, right? Or like observe each other's feelings, observe each other's opinion, discuss, decide, act. And I really think that is so key to the fact that we are able to have discussions more often than arguments. And then the key that I learned, again, in recovery, is don't keep a record of wrongs, right? It's done. We've made a decision. We've had the discussion. We've made the decision, and we're moving on. And that's great. Like, honestly, if you told me a week later, like, what'd you guys argue about? Like, I wouldn't remember, because it's done. That was then, this is now. So that's ODA. I just think it's a really cool piece to share as well. what else? I'm just making sure to see where I got. We talk about this. All right. So I'm going to take 1 second to pause here because I'm saying all this stuff and it might seem really basic, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. If it was easy, everybody would stay sober one day at a time. If it was easy, everybody would get up at 6:10 a.m. and exercise. These things might be simple, but don't confuse something being simple with something being easy. It's not easy. And I'm a yes and kind of girl. Don't know if you ever read that book, but I love it. And we need to give ourselves some grace in this, right? I mean, this is a process, not an event. It's hard. It's hard. We're all here because it's hard. It's hard. Still hard for me sometimes. Still hard for me sometimes. COVID, I had 24 years sober during COVID. And I would say that outside of my first 6 months, that was some of the hardest 6 months I went through. I can do a whole talk on dealing with COVID and watching everybody else and how they dealt with COVID, but that's for another night. So the next thing brings me to my next basic message here, but tried and true. Make the next right decision. So the way that I look at making the next right decision is it's putting one day at a time into action. This is like a verb, making the next right decision. One day at a time. I don't know what I would call it, my noun or something. It is what it is. It's just kind of the umbrella. Making the next right decision is what actually brings it alive. Like I read earlier, put on the blinders, go to work, come home, go for a run, shower, go to a meeting, talk to my sponsor, make the next right decision. And then little by little becomes a lot. So the way that I like to refer to this, which I think is kind of funny, is to be a nerd. I was a nerd. I am a nerd. I like to make the next right decision. I just think it's a funny way to refer to it, is like that I'm a nerd and that I make the next right decision. I found that the more that I did this, making the next right decision, this kind of action, is almost like a muscle. The more that I did it, and then the more that I saw the results of it and the successes of it, the more that I wanted to do it. And I was able to maybe make bigger steps or better steps, or whatever they might be, and look for those rewards. It was very, very satisfying to make the next right decision and get those results. What did that look like in early sobriety? What that looked like in early sobriety, probably the best way to summarize it, is people, places, and things. So making the next right decision was contacting all of the people that I had, drank with or used with, and telling them that, we can't hang out anymore. Not going to any of the places that would be a trigger for me, or driving down certain roads, or for me, driving through Valley Forge Park. I couldn't do that for a long time because I used to do that and drink and use in Valley Forge Park. Things, boxing up a bunch of my things and making the next right decision to really do an inventory of my belongings and understand what might trigger me in one way or another, and kind of getting rid of those, or at least putting them away for a period of time. So in early recovery, that's what making the next right decision looked like in my personal life. And of course, outside of just going to meetings and talking to my sponsor and all of that. Today, making the next right decision, or being a nerd, kind of looks like what we've talked about, some things, right? Getting up to exercise, even when I don't feel like it. Eating the vegetables, right? Eating the Brussels sprouts the other night. Oh, I would rather have the macaroni and cheese also, but I'm going to have the Brussels sprouts. So that's like making the next right decision. And it sounds so, again, simple. This is like not rocket science stuff, but these are truly muscles that get stronger over time, for whether it's, again, recovery or life or at work or whatever it might be. And make the next right decision is probably one of my absolute favorite and also most annoying sayings, because it's measurable. It's really measurable. I do a talk for, like I mentioned earlier about where I got the Post-it note, right? I talk for teenagers. And the way that I put it with teenagers, I talk to them a little bit about make the next right decision. But the way that I put it for younger kids, and it's primarily like 10th, 11th, 12th graders that I talk to, is micro decisions. And I say to them, you're going to be in these situations, and I can't tell you no. I'm not going to tell you not to the party. I'm not going to tell you no, because the second I tell you no, they're going to freaking run right towards it. What I can do is say, can you pause? Just pause and think, is this decision what I'm about to do next? This little micro decision in this moment with my friends, is this going to move me towards something that's what I want, towards a goal, whatever that might be? Or is this going to move me back? Is this going to take away something positive from my life, possibly? And when I talk to them about that idea of just taking a moment to pause and thinking about those moments, those micro decisions, they get it. It's really, really cool to see that like light bulb turn on. When I say, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying pause. And they can do that. They get that. They can respect that suggestion. The other thing that I'm learning today, I'll kind of say where I am today, as a very, very busy mom. I work like almost 2 jobs. I have 2 kids. I work out at 6:15, 6:10 in the morning. I'm tired. I'm working on today the idea that sometimes making the next right decision is actually resting. Am I allowed to do that? I don't know. I hope somebody can give me like a thumbs up if I'm allowed to rest sometimes, because I'm not good at that, but I'm working on it. And that's another gift of recovery is, first of all, just being clear-headed all the time. And that's also sometimes a pain in the butt, because I am clear-headed all the time. It can be really annoying. But to be able to realize that I'm failing in that. That's not something I'm good at. I'm not good at resting. And I'm modeling kind of being crazy all the time for my kids sometimes. And so I need to get better at that. Speaking of my kids, I love quotes. I said that earlier. And I love to annoy my children with endless quotes, which they roll their eyes at, but they actually remember them. So this is one of my favorite quotes. This is kind of like an updated version, if you will, of Make the Next Right Decision. So it's by F.M. Alexander. And it says, people do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. And then I put a little note here. I don't know if I made this up or if I heard this somewhere, but the dream is in the routine. That's where you reach the goals. It's in the routine. It's in the minutia. It's in the day-to-day. We're going to get to that in a minute, because I have a really, really cool other message to share about that. But just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. It's not easy. Making the next right decision is not easy. I don't love Brussels sprouts. But, if we have them for 5 nights in a row, I'll eat them for 4. It's good. It's good. So again, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. Just because some of the things I've shared with you tonight might not be rocket science, right? Meeting makers make it. Baby steps, 1 day at a time, make the next right decision. Not rocket science. But I'm sitting here 28 years sober, and I'm still practicing these things today. So I don't know where they get lost along the way for some people. I don't know where or why they start to maybe gather dust. But I always return back to the foundation, because that's what worked. That's what I built my house on, right? It's like when you see a home edition being made, you feel like nothing happens forever. You feel like you're just watching months and months of nothing. And then all of a sudden, like, the house is up. And it's because they were spending all that time building the foundation before they could build the house. And so that's why these pieces for me are so very valuable. Okay, so I have one other piece to share. I'm going to shift our attention a little bit away from specific kind of like recovery slogans. And I want to talk about how all this kind of connects to daily life and I hope all of this was really connected to daily life for anyone and everyone. But this next piece is something that I personally still struggle with. I'm not here to tell you that I'm perfect just because I'm 28 years sober. I've made lots of great, huge mistakes, perfectly sober. But at least I get to work on myself. So this is something I'm currently working on. Life is the mundane Wednesday. And I think it's kind of ironic that we are actually talking on a Wednesday. There's an article, it's a 2013 article by Tim Urban, and I'm as interpreted by Tracy Viola. So let's actually look at what Tim Urban says. It's a much, much longer article than this. I just kind of grabbed the 2 slides that I thought were very, very relevant. So life is a picture, but you live in a pixel. Jack sees his life as a rich picture depicting an epic story and assumes that the key to his happiness lies in the broad components of the image. But this is a mistake because Jack doesn't live in the picture's broad strokes. He lives at all times in a single pixel of the image, a single today. So while thousands of Jack's todays will, to an outsider from far away, begin to look like a complete picture, Jack spends each moment of his actual reality in one unremarkable today pixel or another. Jack's error is brushing off his mundane Wednesday and focusing entirely on the big picture, when in fact, the mundane Wednesday is the experience of his actual life. Well, shit, I'm not very good at that. I'm not going to lie. I'm very good at one day at a time. I'm very good at make the next right decision. But if I'm also being very honest about kind of who I am, you know, the whole kind of like it's the journey, not the destination. If I had to be completely honest, I'm kind of like a destination girl. I kind of like the destination. I kind of like, if I'm like in Google Maps, like I'm not taking the scenic route, right? I'm like, just like A to B, baby, A to B. And even though I've been raised on one day at a time and I do it and I'm good at it, this concept of pausing and trying to like enjoy that mundane Wednesday is still really hard for me. I love this image and I love the way that Tim Urban kind of explains this, because it really is that tug of war that's so natural. I hope I'm not the only crazy person that's kind of the destination girl, but it is this tug of war of recognizing the mundane Wednesday as being your life, right? This is your life versus the big picture, which who knows? I mean, the big picture is always changing. It can change at any minute, right? What's the saying? If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, you know? Anyway, I love this so much. And just like Bob, in What About Bob, there's one scene where he's talking to Dr. Morgan and he's like, I'm doing the work and I'm baby stepping and I'm doing the work. And I feel like that. And even though I do have over 10,000 days sober, it's still, you know, there's still things that I need to work on. There's still like things I need to get honest about. But as long as I don't use and drink, I have the opportunity to do that. Will I, you know, it's the whole like progress, not perfection. I get it. Will I be really good at this? Is this something I'm going to master? I don't know. But like, at least I recognize it. And I really feel like just even seeing it and just recognizing it is I don't know, a big part of the battle. So I love this so much. The other thing I want to mention is this picture kind of looks familiar. I don't know about you, but it looks familiar to me. When I actually put this slide deck together, I noticed this. And it kind of looks like this picture, which is what we started with. We started with this mess of Legos that we discussed earlier. And so to kind of like put it all together, it really is one Wednesday at a time. And it really is one Lego at a time. And these are the things that create the big picture of our lives. The other thing that this made me think of, because as I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge 80s fan. I could literally do a whole talk on the 1980s because I love it so much. But it reminded me of the Ferris Bueller scene at the art gallery. So I have to play that. Lord knows you're the first time. Let me get what I want this time. All right. So kind of in closing, recovery is big. Being on your own journey in recovery, whether you're watching somebody else go through they're trying to get sober, you're part of Al-Anon, or it's big. It's big and it's messy sometimes, but life is big and messy. And the good thing is I'm not trying to figure it all out today. I'm not suggesting anybody here try to figure it all out today. I am actually just asking that we keep it small, right? We keep it in the day. We recognize the pixel, and I'm going to personally try to work on just enjoying the pixel, because sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just kind of want to get through the pixel. I've been working with a client the last couple of weeks where I just wanted to be like, I just, as soon as this project is over, and that's such a shame, because that's like 2 weeks of my life that I'm giving to this person. And I forget who wrote 4,000 Weeks. I'm blanking on the author. But anyway, in the book 4,000 Weeks, it basically says, right, we've like, on average, right, 4,000 weeks of life. And I wanted to rush through 2 of those weeks to just kind of get through them. And I don't know. I don't want to do that. So I'm here today. I just want to put this up on my screen. The home group that I go to, there's a meeting and they close the meeting with this. And I still love it. I hear it all the time. And I think it's just so relevant. So I guess my closing question is, we've got all these days where we can make all these tiny micro decisions and make the next right decision. And we have all these tiny moments. So I hope you do what's best for you. And I'm curious what you're going to do with them. And I guess with that, thanks for letting me share.